The iron gates of the Whitmore estate had a memory for faces. They had seen drivers and florists and marble installers, politicians with quick smiles and attorneys with careful ones. In the last year, they had learned new visitors too. Nurses with starched jackets and CVs like armor, walking in with confidence and walking out with eyes that wouldn't meet the gravel. 3 days, 4 at the most. Each resignation felt like a sigh exhaled into stone. On a gray Monday, the gates folded back to let a lone rideshare slip up the immaculate drive. The car rolled to a stop beneath the arch of the porte cochere, and a woman stepped out with a small suitcase and a larger presence. Her scrubs were charcoal, the hem pressed, her shoes plain and practical. She was in her mid-30s. Her hair was drawn into a neat, protective style. Her gaze was steady in the way of someone who had learned the cost of looking away. "Miss Cole?" the man at the door asked, clipboard in hand, as if the paper might anchor him to a situation he did not control. "Amaya Cole," she said. Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It simply landed where it was meant to land. He was handsome in a weary way, tailored blazer, tie loosened by habit, and his expression carried an apology for things he wasn't sure how to repair. "Daniel Whitmore," he said. "Thank you for coming on short notice." They shook hands. He took the suitcase before she could protest and led her through a foyer the size of a chapel. The Whitmore house did not gleam so much as glare. Marble floors that refused to show a footprint, brass rails you could see yourself in, paintings placed with the exactness of a scolding finger. The house demanded stillness and punished sound. "My mother is upstairs," Daniel said as they climbed a broad staircase. "She has good days, and difficult ones." He paused, searching Amaya's face for any flinch he could recognize, any sign she might take the next flight out if he told the truth plainly. No one has lasted longer than 3 days. Amaya's mouth didn't move, but her eyes did. A small shift toward a photo on a side table. A young woman in a yellow dress laughing into the light. The frame had been polished more recently than anything else in the hall. "I'm not here to be liked," Amaya said. "I'm here to care." Daniel's relief was as visible as the lines on his forehead, but it came with a flicker of doubt, too. "Everyone says that at first," he murmured, not unkindly. He knocked once on a bedroom door already open a fraction. "Mother?" "Do come in," came a voice from inside, brittle as frost underfoot. They entered. The room was large enough to hold 2 hospital beds, a sitting area, and a library of books arranged by pretension more than subject. The curtains were drawn back so the winter light could fall like judgment. In a high-backed chair near the window sat Gwendolyn Whitmore, Gwen to no one currently living wrapped in a shawl that had more weight than warmth. Her hair was silver and painstakingly arranged. Her body had lost muscle, but not authority. She looked like a monarch whose empire had shrunk to the size of her bedroom and who planned to rule it twice as hard. "This is Miss Cole," Daniel said. "She'll be—" "I can see that she is not Ms. Fitzpatrick," Gwendolyn said, cutting a glance through Amaya without landing on her. "Or Ms. Grossman, or the one who insisted on oat yogurt as God's instrument of salvation." "Mother," Daniel warned, though his voice lacked hard edges. Gwendolyn's eyes slid to Amaya's uniform, then to her skin, then to her hands. "Ms. Cole," she said, tasting the syllables for offense. "Where did you go to nursing school?" "Grady's accelerated program, then night rotation at Piedmont. Critical care certification last year," Amaya answered, the facts lined up like instruments on a tray. Gwendolyn said. And your reason for taking this position? Surely there are other patients whose families don't own iron gates. I need the work, Amaya said simply, and I'm good at it. Gwendolyn's mouth made the shape of a smile but produced nothing warm. We shall see about that. Amaya set a tray on the side table, a glass of water that had not yet sweated, a small cup with pills already counted, a folded napkin. It's time for your medication, Mrs. Whitmore. Your first words to me are an instruction. Gwendolyn did not reach for the cup. My first words are care, Amaya replied, and the quiet in the room tilted a degree. She waited without hovering. After a long half-minute, Gwendolyn took the pills, a queen consenting to a treaty she meant to violate later, and swallowed them as if forgiveness were hidden in the chalk. When she handed the cup back, her finger brushed Amaya's glove. She pulled away as though she'd touched a burner. Thank you, Amaya said. She meant it in the literal way. Thanks for allowing the medicine to do its job. Ms. Cole, Gwendolyn said, as Amaya lifted the tray, you may find that I expect more than competence. I expect to be obeyed. I expect respect, and I expect not to be bored. You will not be bored, Amaya said, and I will respect you even when you do not make it easy. When they stepped into the hall, Daniel exhaled so hard it looked like surrender. She wasn't as sharp as I expected. She was measuring, Amaya said. People like your mother don't use volume. They use precision, you noticed that fast. I've had practice. The guest room assigned to Amaya was small by Whitmore standards and generous by any other. Someone had placed a vase of camellias on the dresser. It was the kind of gesture a house made when it wanted to be known as genteel rather than kind. Amaya set her suitcase on the bench and opened it. The only personal items were a framed photo of her sister, Leah, a leather-bound notebook, and a small tin of lavender balm. She washed her hands in the adjoining bath and looked at herself in the mirror, lit by the flattering cruelty of rich houses. The reflection gave her nothing she didn't already know. The faint half-moons under her eyes, the faint scar near her left temple from an accident with a metal rack in a hospital supply closet, the steadying line of her mouth. She touched the edge of Leah's photograph. Leah smiled back from a beach day 6 years gone, hair wrapped in a scarf, one hand holding a bottle of orange soda. In the corner of the frame, a hospital wristband was tucked like a page marker in a book that ended too soon. Amaya carried the photo to the nightstand and set it down where she could see it when she woke. She didn't pray anymore, not in a way Leah might have recognized, but the placement felt like a vow restated. Dinner was silent enough to be ritual. The cook, a 60-something woman with the posture of someone who had fought but with her own life and wrestled it into something workable, ladled soup into a porcelain bowl. I'm Rosa, she said under her breath as she handed Amaya a spoon. Rosa Delgado. If you need anything, you come to the kitchen. The kitchen is Switzerland, thank you, Amaya said, grateful for the truce. Rosa's eyes held something like warning and something like welcome. I've been here 2 years, she said, voice barely above the simmer of the stockpot. Long enough to know the house eats people who come in hungry for approval. I didn't come for approval, Amaya said. Good, Rosa replied, because you won't get it. Gwendolyn did not join them at the table. She ate in her room, and Rosa sent up a tray as one would send tribute to a deity who might destroy the village. Afterward, Amaya brought the evening meds and a warm washcloth infused with the lavender balm. Aromatherapy, Gwendolyn said, as Amaya wrung out the cloth. How modern. It helps with stiffness, Amaya said. And with sleep. Gwendolyn made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a sigh, a noise people made when they were tired of failing to impress someone who refused to be impressed. Do you have children, Miss Cole? No. Wise. Multiplying misfortune only grows a tree that cannot be pruned. Amaya folded the cloth and set it across Gwendolyn's wrists with the kind of simple reverence that belonged in places more sacred than this. Everyone deserves sleep, she said, even misfortune. She would not argue with a blade. She would simply refuse to bleed. The next morning, the Whitmore house kept its 7:30 a.m. appointment with itself. Breakfast arrived at Gwendolyn's chair like a ceremony. Black tea precisely 205 degrees. Scrambled eggs that made no sound when the fork touched them. Toast that had been brushed with butter and browned beneath a gas flame, not an electric coil. Amaya delivered the tray and stood at a calculated distance, close enough to observe, far enough to preserve a dignity that Gwendolyn mistook for rank. At least you aren't late, Gwendolyn said. Punctuality is respect made visible. I agree, Amaya said. Gwendolyn cut a slice of toast, all economy and no joy. The last one tried to sell me on probiotics. Imagine being evangelized to in your own home with Greek yogurt for scripture. How long did she last? Amaya asked, a question disguised as indulgence. 3 days, Gwendolyn said, pleased by the neatness of the number. The one before that thought we were equals because her mother taught French. 2.5. There was a Ms. Alvarez who fancied herself a social worker. She cried when I told her I found her pity uglier than my wrinkles. That one lasted only 2. Amaya listened, the way a surgeon watched a monitor, reading what lived beneath the lines. And what would make someone last longer? Skill without attitude, Gwendolyn said. Obedience without obsequiousness. A face I don't mind looking at. Do you mind looking at mine? Amaya asked quietly. Gwendolyn's eyes lifted, startled that the chessboard had shifted without her moving a piece. Not yet, she said. We'll see. When Amaya left the room, Rosa was waiting by the stairs with a dish towel in her hands and a story on her tongue. You're the first one I've seen who doesn't flinch, Rosa said. They all come in with strategies, charm, distance, overqualification. You come in like a tide. Tides leave, Amaya said. Not before they change the coastline, Rosa replied. By noon, the house had adopted Amaya's presence as a fact to be endured. She charted medication times with the precision of a metronome and organized the sitting room books by subject when no one was looking. She did the work whose absence always announces itself, but whose presence is never praised. That afternoon, she found an old photograph face down behind a clock. She picked it up without asking why it had fallen. 2 women smiled at the camera, a younger Gwendolyn with lipstick like a signature, and a young woman in a yellow dress with the unguarded laughter of someone who had not yet learned how sharp the world could be. Amaya set the photo upright. When she turned, Gwendolyn was watching. That was my daughter, Gwendolyn said. Her voice did not wobble. It didn't have to for the words to tremble. Clara. She looks like you, Amaya said. She looked like my husband, Gwendolyn corrected, and like herself. Amaya waited for a door that did not open. She nodded once and returned to her work. That night, the house dreamed with her. In her sleep, Amaya saw Leah in a public hospital hallway, clutching her stomach, pale beneath fluorescent light. She heard the nurse's voice saying, "Take a seat. We'll call you when it's your turn." She saw the clock hands walk in circles, When she woke, it was to the quiet of a house that believed it could buy silence and the pounding of a memory that could not be purchased off. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. She had not taken this job by accident. She took it because whatever broke in places like the Whitmore house also broke in places like the waiting room where Leah died, and she had begun to suspect that the break was the same. On the third morning, the rain came soft and ordinary, tapping the window with patient fingers. Gwendolyn announced that she would not be bathing. "It's invasive," she said, "and unnecessary." "I have no visitors planned. Your skin is compromised, Mrs. Whitmore," Amaya said, setting the towel on the warming rack. Neglect becomes infection faster than indignation becomes honesty. "You enjoy lecturing me, Miss Cole?" "I enjoy keeping you out of the hospital." Gwendolyn lifted her chin, a woman summoned to a duel and choosing a pistol lined with pearls. "I don't want people like you touching my body." Rosa, who was dusting in the hallway, went still. Daniel, who had come home mid-morning to sign a stack of documents his assistant insisted were urgent, shifted a fraction toward the door. Amaya did not color. She did not pale. She did not betray anything that would make this about her. She lowered herself to Gwendolyn's eye level and met the older woman's gaze the way a lighthouse met a storm, by refusing to blink. "You can insult me all day," she said, voice even. "But if you refuse basic hygiene, your body will suffer. No medicine will fix what neglect invites. I won't force you." "I don't do that. I'll leave these here. I'll be back in 30 minutes. You can decide then." She placed the basin and the cloths on the table and left the room. In the hall, Daniel's eyes were wider than he understood. "She won't. She might," Amaya said. "But even if she doesn't, you don't win a war by breaking the same wall again and again. You starve it of attention until it crumbles." "You studied psychology?" "I learned to survive." 30 minutes later, Amaya returned. The basin was where she had left it. The cloths were not. Gwendolyn's hair was pinned up and her jaw was set, which in some women is the same as yes. "Keep the water hot," Gwendolyn said. "Yes, ma'am," Amaya said, and the ma'am was not subservience, it was grammar. When the bath was done, when the lotion had been applied with hands that translated care into a language the body could understand, when the robe had been wrapped and tied, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and something like rain, Gwendolyn said, very low, "Your hands are gentle." "They're strong," Amaya said. "Gentle is how I choose to use them." The next day, Gwendolyn tried a different blade. "Are you married?" she asked. "No." "Good." Men are anchors that present themselves as ships. "I know plenty of women who built ships without anchors," Amaya said, checking the O2 saturation. "Do you intend to?" "I intend to keep you breathing." "You speak in the present as if it can't be altered." "I've had the past do a poor job of negotiating on my behalf." Gwendolyn studied her. The older woman had the unnerving habit of staring like she could see a thought manifest. Like before you formed the sentence, she could already read the subject. "What did the past take from you, Ms. Cole?" "My sister," Amaya said, not sparing the truth the courtesy of a euphemism. "She died waiting for care because a nurse confused volume with urgency and policy with compassion." Gwendolyn made a small, disbelieving sound. "And you blame the system?" "I learned not to waste blame where action works better." "Action," Gwendolyn repeated, but the word sounded like a language she hadn't practiced, and now found herself too old to master. That evening, Daniel joined Amaya on the back terrace while the sky changed colors no one could afford. "She hates to lose, he said, as if he were reporting on the weather in a town he had left but still checked on. Then don't make this a contest, Amaya said. Everything is a contest to her. Not grief. Grief? Amaya nodded toward the second-floor window, where a sliver of curtain moved in an old rhythm. Your mother is grieving a daughter, she said softly, and a person she believes she failed to control into happiness. Some people call that parenting. It's just fear with better PR. Daniel looked like a man watching a chessboard in which someone had replaced his king with a mirror. I've never heard anyone talk to her like you do. I'm not talking to her fear, Amaya said. Fear is hard of hearing. On the weekend, the family physician came to examine Gwendolyn. Dr. Langley was the kind of man whose tie knot spoke of a marriage that had survived, not because it avoided difficulty, but because it had chosen to forgive it. He took notes, listened to lungs, ordered labs. She's less combative, he said to Amaya in the hall, surprised to hear the words leave his mouth. You must have an approach. I have a policy, Amaya said. Don't escalate. Don't indulge. Be exact, Dr. Langley repeated, satisfied by the fit of the word. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That night, Gwendolyn's fever spiked. She woke panicked, breath coming short and mean, and the old house startled awake with her, as if it had learned long ago that when she said the word now, time itself had to obey. Amaya was there before the monitor could think to protest. Oxygen, cold cloths, a call placed to Dr. Langley with a mind like a checklist. Daniel hovered until Amaya gave him a task on purpose: lower the blinds, bring the second pillow, count her breaths, and he moved faster than his confusion. You saved her life, Dr. Langley said 2 hours later, when the fever had broken and the breathing had steadied and the house had dared to exhale. I did my job, Amaya said, but her voice held something that was not pride. It was relief of a variety that came after choosing not to hate the person who made it hardest. When the room was quiet, Gwendolyn spoke into the dark. Why are you still here? Because you are, Amaya said. What do you get out of this? Rest, Amaya said. And when Gwendolyn didn't understand, Amaya added, when you stop hurting people who didn't hurt you, you let other people sleep. Gwendolyn turned her face toward the window. The moon spilled the ordinary magic of its light onto the blanket. You talk like my daughter used to talk, she said. You said her name was Clara. Yes, Clara. The syllables softened something no pill could reach. She believed love was action. She used to put notes in the cook's apron with poetry on them, and I told her the domestics didn't need sonnets. They needed better jobs. She told me sonnets were better jobs. Gwendolyn made a sound like a laugh that had lost its map. She fell in love with a young man at university. I hated him for the audacity of being who he was. Isn't that pathetic? To hate someone for existing outside your story. What was his name? Amaya asked, the question emerging before she could swallow it. Elias, Gwendolyn said, and the name hung in the air like a photograph catching light. Elias Benton. Quiet, serious, a tutor at a youth center, all conviction and no cynicism. I told her he was using her. I told her men like him eat women like us alive, and she told me I had confused appetite with survival. We fought. She left. It rained. The road curved. The car did not. Daniel handled the funeral. I hid behind anger like it was a fur coat I could wear in July. What happened to Elias? Amaya asked, the world narrowing to the width of a wire. He vanished. Or I told myself he did, because the alternative was that he lived somewhere I could not reach, building a life out of the wreckage I had arranged. Amaya carried the silence as one carried an heirloom, carefully, with both hands. When she left the room, when she found Daniel in the garden, where he went to pretend the house did not own his breath, she said, "Tell me about Elias Benton." Daniel turned, the hose forgotten, water streaking a path through a bed of hydrangeas, like a hand over a page. "You know his name?" "Your mother told me." "She never—" He broke off, the sentence collapsing from surprise into memory. "He was a good man," he said finally. "Looked you in the eye without performing virtue. After Clara's death, he came by once with a letter he didn't deliver. I saw the envelope. It had her name in his handwriting. Then he left. Rumor was he moved north." "Why?" Amaya's mouth was dry. She swallowed the stone of her own suspicion. "Because my mother once said a name in a fight she thought I couldn't hear," she said slowly. "Elias." She kept a box of letters I wasn't allowed to touch. She burned most of them after Leah died. I kept the smell. Daniel stared at her like a man who had stumbled into a room and found it was the one he had been looking for his whole life. "You think—" "I don't think anything yet," Amaya said. But the tremor in her chest was not fear. It was recognition finally standing up in a crowded room and saying, "Here." But I have wondered for years why my mother never spoke about my father, except to say he loved books and justice like both were oxygen. Why she never let me meet him. Why she cried when she passed a certain block near the university. If his name was Elias, then my wondering has a shape. Daniel put the hose down and leaned against the cedar post, like a man grateful for architecture. "If this house had mercy to spare," he said very quietly, "it would have given it long ago." "Mercy isn't a house," Amaya said. "It's a decision you have to keep making until it becomes a habit." The revelation did not arrive with trumpets. It entered the way most truths do, on paper, in a shaky hand from another decade. The following morning, Gwendolyn asked for a wooden box from the top shelf of the closet. Rosa brought it down with both hands and a small grunt. Gwendolyn opened it like she was disarming history. Inside lay a stack of documents and a single envelope, yellowed with time. The seal was unbroken. The front read Clara in handwriting that was careful without being precious. Gwendolyn held it out to Amaya. "He brought this to the house the week before Clara's accident," she said. "I told the butler to send him away. I kept the letter because I'm a coward who collects the evidence of her own cruelty, but never enters it into the record." She pressed the envelope into Amaya's palm. "Read it to me." Amaya slid a finger beneath the flap and lifted the paper free. The letter was not long. It said the things letters like that always say when written honestly and without theater. "I love you. I'm not afraid of hard work. I know your mother will never approve and it cannot matter. I want a life with you that looks nothing like the one she planned, but everything like the one we keep dreaming of." It ended with a signature, Elias Benton. Amaya finished and did not trust her voice until she knew it would not break. "He loved her," she said. Gwendolyn closed her eyes. "He loved her," she repeated, and there was salt on her cheek when she opened them. "And I hated him for it." "My mother's name is Patrice," Amaya said, the words arriving without her permission because they were done with silence. "She met a man at a rally at the university once, before I was born. A quiet man who argued beautifully and wore his hope like a jacket he refused to take off even in July. She never told me his name, only that he couldn't stay because her life and his love were not welcome in the same house. Gwendolyn's hand trembled. You think— I think a lot that I cannot prove, Amaya said. But proof is not what this is about, is it? No, Gwendolyn said. It's about what kind of women we decided to be and whether we can bear the cost. That afternoon, Gwendolyn's fever returned with the kind of swiftness that makes doctors curse and nurses move. Amaya moved. She set up the oxygen before Dr. Langley could remove his coat, calculated dosages with a pen tucked behind her ear, and gave Daniel a look that told him to sit down, not because he was in the way, but because he needed to learn how to accept help without confusing it with weakness. When the crisis passed, and the house settled like a ship finding the right wind, Gwendolyn called Amaya over with a finger that no longer commanded. If there's a ledger for women like me, she said, I have written more withdrawals than deposits. I cannot balance it before I die, but I can do one thing properly. You've done more than one, Amaya said. Don't flatter me. I didn't invite you here because I wanted to give you anything. I wanted to prove to myself I could still control anything at all. Gwendolyn drew a breath like climbing a single stair. I am adding you to the family foundation as legacy, not charity. And I wish to designate funds for a clinic, not a wing where rich people put their names, a clinic for the people who are told to wait. Name it for Clara if you like, or for the thing you think could change us more than we deserve. Amaya's throat closed in the gentle way that happens when grace arrives and insists on being paid forward. I don't want your money, she said. And it wasn't defiance. It was discipline. You'll take it, Gwendolyn said, because it isn't mine anymore. Consider it stolen from a life I refuse to live and return to those who might. Daniel stood in the doorway with his eyes bright and his jaw working. I've already called the attorney, he said. We can file the amendments this week. Elias would have hated this house, Gwendolyn murmured. He would have told me walls like these are built out of fear and adjectives. Perhaps he would have been right. She looked at Amaya. I would like to see the garden. They took her there in a wheelchair that had learned to roll with dignity. The oak tree spread its arms like a benevolent conspiracy. The bench was the same one where Clara had read long summers ago, where Daniel had hidden report cards he feared would not be perfect enough, where Elias had waited once with a book in his hands and a future in his eyes. Gwendolyn closed her eyes and lifted her face to a sun that had no interest in her sins. Clara used to say she wanted to grow flowers no one else had the patience for, Gwendolyn said. I told her that flowers didn't matter. She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't ended as a confession. She was right. Amaya set a hand on her shoulder. This is a hard season, she said. But hard seasons have a habit of making things grow that easy one's never bothered to plant. I am tired, Gwendolyn said. Not of living. Of pretending, then stop. Gwendolyn opened her eyes. Stay with me? I'm here, Amaya said. Gwendolyn Whitmore died with the window cracked and the curtain lifting in the kind of breeze people pay to recreate on screened-in porches. She did not deliver the kind of deathbed statement that makes biographies easier to write. She simply exhaled and did not inhale, her hand in Amaya's, her mouth a line drawn under a paragraph that had finally found its period. Daniel found them in the morning. He knelt on the floor beside the bed and let his grief do what grief must do, be witnessed. He was not a man who cried in front of staff. He cried in front of family. The funeral was small by Whitmore calculation and enormous by Whitmore honesty. They set a cluster of chairs beneath the oak and did not pretend the shade was anything other than mercy. Rosa brought lemonade that no one drank. Dr. Langley stood far enough back to let the family see itself, but close enough to be seen. Amaya was asked to speak. She had never liked microphones. She didn't need one. Mrs. Whitmore was a hard woman, she said, and I won't rewrite that because she can no longer hear it. But in her final weeks, she did something most people never do. She chose to change. She chose to go down fighting herself instead of everyone else. She did not die perfect, but she died reaching. I think that matters. No one clapped. The oak leaves moved. A bird landed on the top of a chair and decided against it. Afterward, in the kitchen where honor always tastes like dishwater, Daniel handed Amaya an envelope. She left letters, he said, one for me and one for you. Amaya opened hers at the far end of the table. The handwriting was Gwendolyn's, but smaller, as if apology required less space. Amaya, if courage had come sooner, I would have said this out loud. You are the mirror I refused to look into because I feared the angle. You carried the strength I tried to break in other women and could no longer recognize in myself. You stayed. You cared. You saw me. If there is any place for me beyond this, it is because you taught me how to walk there. Use what I have to build what I stole. G. Whitmore. Amaya folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope as if returning a borrowed book. She meant it, Daniel said. I know, Amaya said. That's what makes it heavy. They met with attorneys. They sat with architects who spoke in words like clinic flow and patient intake and sunlight as therapy. They visited a lot in the West End that had been empty so long, weeds had applied for homestead rights. 4 weeks later, Amaya stood on the rectangle of earth and imagined rooms. She imagined a woman like Leah walking in with pain and being met by someone who said, "Come with me," not "take a seat." They named it Clara's house because everything else felt like theft. Daniel argued for the Whitmore Clinic, and Amaya looked at him until he was embarrassed. Rosa baked a tray of cornbread for the first crew of volunteers and wrote "Welcome Home" on a paper sign because she still believed paper could tell the truth when wood could not. Dr. Langley arranged for second-hand equipment from a hospital that upgraded to the newest machines, but forgot to update the places where people first learned to be seen. On a Saturday in late spring, the brick went up with the kind of speed faith has when given a budget. Amaya did not take an office. She took a cart with organized drawers, a stethoscope, and a schedule that kept her where the questions were. People came. A grandmother named Carla whose knees told the weather more accurately than the local news. A line cook with a burn he'd wrapped in the lie of electrical tape. A teenage girl who had fainted twice and didn't know if fear itself counts as a pre-existing condition. A man in his 50s whose blood pressure had lived a life of crime and came clean in front of a nurse who refused to look away. "You're the one who opened this place?" Carla asked, watching Amaya wrap her knee with the gentleness of someone making a sacred package out of ordinary flesh. "I helped it get here," Amaya said. "It was waiting for us." Rosa worked the front desk 2 afternoons a week and told anyone who would listen that the coffee was free because kindness should not carry a price tag. Daniel ran the numbers with a holiness that surprised him and left the donor's wall blank on purpose. Dr. Langley came by after his hospital rounds to practice medicine the way he'd always wanted to, at eye level. One afternoon, a woman stood in the doorway with a familiar mouth. She was in her 60s, a scarf tied at her throat, the way women tie the past when it keeps blowing into their eyes. "I'm looking for Amaya Cole," she said to Rosa, who pointed down the hallway without asking for insurance. Miss Cole? The woman said softly. Amaya turned and froze in the gentle way of a person recognizing a name before a face. Mama, she said. Patrice Cole's embrace was as fierce as it had been when Amaya was 9 and tired of spelling tests and the small violence children inflict on each other before they learn how to be ashamed of it. They held each other, not prophetic or cinematic, just a mother and daughter under fluorescent lights that now felt like daylight. He would have loved this, Patrice said, her mouth near Amaya's ear. Who? Amaya asked, though the question was not ignorance so much as invitation. Elias, Patrice said. I kept the name from you too long. I thought I was protecting you from a story this town didn't deserve to write. He was gentle. He was brave. He wanted to meet you when you were small. I told him no because I didn't want you to live in an argument. I am sorry, Amaya stepped back, her face wet and unafraid to show it. We're building something he can walk into anyway, she said, even if it took him years and a different set of hands. Patrice looked around at the waiting room where a little boy had fallen asleep against his mother's hip, and an old man argued about baseball with a nurse who knew better. I think you already did. That evening, Amaya stood at the back door of Clara's house and watched the sky shift color without asking permission. Daniel came to stand beside her with 2 paper cups of coffee. They drank in silence until he said, I think about my mother a lot. I do too, Amaya said, not with anger. I used to think forgiveness meant saying what happened didn't matter. It means it won't own us, Amaya said. That's different. Do you think Elias? Whilst Daniel began, then stopped. I think, Amaya said, that love rarely dies the way people do. They closed the clinic at 9 and swept the floor because sometimes sweeping is a prayer when words feel like bragging. Rosa locked the front door twice, not because the neighborhood required it, though some nights it did, but because care itself deserves ceremony. Dr. Langley sent a text with a heart that surprised him and amused his wife. In bed, Amaya read Gwendolyn's letter again before turning out the light. She kept it in the drawer with Leah's photograph and the tin of lavender balm. Some nights she dreamed of iron gates that no longer recognized her because she was no longer someone they let in and pushed out. She was the person on the far side, holding the door for others. The Whitmore house did not become a museum to its mistakes. Daniel sold it and used the proceeds to endow Clara's house and 3 satellite clinics that would not bear any last name. He moved into a smaller home that had wooden floors that dared you to dance and windows that let the light in even on days that had not earned it. He started coming to Clara's house on Tuesdays to read to kids about a dog who wanted to be a detective and a girl who built a machine that copied the sound of rain. Rosa retired eventually, though retired meant worked 4 days instead of 5. She hung a photograph of Gwendolyn as a young mother on the clinic wall, not to idolize her, but to remind the staff that people are never just the worst thing they've done, and to remind herself that righteousness is a poor anesthetic. She taught a teenage volunteer how to make cornbread without measuring cups, which is how love records its recipes. On the first anniversary of the clinic's opening, they planted a magnolia tree near the entrance. The plaque did not mention donors or tax advantages. It read, "For the ones who waited too long, we see you now." Underneath, smaller, Clara's house. Later that day, a young man walked in with a battered copy of a Baldwin novel in his back pocket and nerves in his smile. He looked at Amaya like a person looking into his own family tree and finding a branch he had suspected would be there. "Excuse me," he said. I'm looking for Miss Cole. You found her, Amaya said. My name is Nathan Benton, he said. I think you knew my grandfather. Amaya felt the world tilt in the gentle way of a ship turning toward the correct shore. Elias? She said. Nathan nodded. He passed away last year. We found letters when we were going through his things. He wrote about a woman named Clara who changed how he thought the world worked, and about a clinic he imagined before clinics like this existed. When I saw the name on the sign, I thought this might be the place where his idea learned to breathe. Amaya did not cry in front of patients, unless crying was what the patient required. Today, the patient was her. She walked Nathan down the hall and showed him the rooms. She showed him the window, where the light behaved better than in other rooms, for no scientific reason they had yet discovered. She showed him the supply closet, where a volunteer had hung a sign that read, "You are not late. You are here." He would have loved this, Nathan said, using the same words Patrice had used and finding that they tasted like truth. Then let him love it, Amaya said, through you. They stood together under the magnolia. The leaves made a soft clapping sound that didn't feel like applause so much as approval. The story of Clara's house spread, but not because anyone curated it. People told it on porches and in pickup lines and at church after the benediction. They told it in waiting rooms and under hairdryers and at bus stops where time moves with a theology of its own. They told it the way people tell stories that remind them of who they could be on their best days. They never told it as a tale of a rich woman who bought redemption. They told it as the story of a nurse who refused to be made small, and of a son who learned to steward rather than hoard, and of a cook who believed kitchens are where revolutions keep the coffee warm. Amaya kept working. That was her love language. On nights when the clinic was quiet, she sometimes sat in the last chair in the waiting room and closed her eyes. She'd listen for the old sounds, the click of a pen, the rustle of a magazine, the heavy breath of worry. She'd listen and give thanks that when the door opened now, someone stepped forward with a clipboard and said, "We've got you," and meant it. She visited the cemetery where Clara's name was carved into stone like a sentence God had not argued with. She brought camellias and set them down with the gentleness she had learned not from nursing school, but from Leah, who had always believed flowers were not a waste if they made 1 minute of a hard day easier. She stood there and told Clara about the clinic, and about Rosa's cornbread, and about Daniel learning to laugh without apologizing. She told her that Gwendolyn had died with the window open, and that the sky had been generous. She told her that the oak still threw shade like a promise, and that in that shade, people had spoken words like, "I'm sorry," and "I forgive you," without choking on them. She did not tell her about Elias, because some words belong to the living to pass hand to hand like bread. Instead, she wrote him a letter she never mailed. It said the things letters like that say when written honestly and without theater. Thank you for loving someone who needed it. I think I am a result of that love. I am trying to spend it well. On an ordinary Tuesday, as the sun gave the sidewalks a golden argument for optimism, a girl brought her little brother to the clinic because he had a cough that wouldn't quit. They sat with their hands folded in unison, two small citizens of a city that had not always given them its best. Amaya knelt in front of them and smiled in the way that opens rooms. "You're in the right place," she said. She believed it. She had built a place where rightness was not an accident, but a habit. That night, after she locked up and turned off the waiting room lamp, Amaya walked outside. The magnolia leaves caught the streetlight and turned it into something warm. The air smelled like rain working up the nerve to fall. She thought of gates that used to keep people out, and of doors that now opened to anyone with lungs and a heartbeat. She thought of Gwendolyn at the window, of Clara in her yellow dress, of Daniel with a stack of contracts he finally knew how to sign without selling his soul, of Rosa spinning cornbread batter with a wooden spoon like a conductor who had learned the score by heart. She thought of Leah. She always would. She touched the tin of lavender balm in her pocket and smiled at how love stays ridiculous and specific. The breeze lifted the hair at the back of her neck. Somewhere a boy laughed. Somewhere a siren wailed and kept moving. Somewhere a woman put a pot of beans on the stove and decided to make enough for whoever might knock. Amaya headed home with tired feet and an easy spine. She would come back in the morning. People would need her, and she would need them right back. She crossed the street in the crosswalk, like a person who knows she has the right of way and the wisdom to look both ways anyway. The gates of the Whitmore estate no longer tracked nurses. They watched delivery trucks and a for sale sign that had been replaced with sold. If gates can regret, perhaps those did. But gates are only metal. People are capable of more. At Clara's house, the door did not creak. It swung open the way a welcome should. The sign on the wall by the entrance, the one Daniel had insisted on commissioning, and Rosa had insisted on hanging slightly crooked so it felt human, read, "Here, care is not a favor. It is our job underneath, in smaller letters. Be kind or be quiet." Amaya smiled at it every day. She never got tired of the reminder. She never would. And somewhere beyond language, beyond ledger and law and logic, a tired world turned one more time toward morning.